Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Fantasy Football Weekly. We got Britt Flynn here. I'm Jorge Edwards. We got a special guest for you tonight. We're going to be talking about some of the people that we're high and low on in this year's NFL draft, as well as some predictions we got for the 2024 fantasy football season. So stick around. Britt Flynn, before we get to our guest, how are you doing today?
I'm great. It's almost Friday. This week has been long, but it's almost over. At least in my mind. I know it's not technically almost over because I do work this weekend. But at least, we're moving forward into some semi you know what I'm trying to say.
Moving in that direction. We're moving in
Yes,
that
we're
Yeah.
there. How about
I
you?
I'm doing all right. We have a new unofficial sponsor for today's show, Woodruff Reserve Bourbon here whiskey. Again, unofficial sponsor, but if you're watching and you care to be an official sponsor, just throwing it out there. But enough about that. I want to bring on today's guest co-host. He is one of the co-hosts on Fourth and Frames, our longest running flagship fantasy football podcast here at fantasyandframes.com. He's going to fit right in with us. We're all analytics based when it comes to talking about our content. So he is one of the best out there. If you're not following him, you should be following. I'm talking about Drew Scott at Drew3MR on Twitter. Drew, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for the kind words and thank you for having me. I've been a big fan of the show since you guys started this up. I haven't missed an episode yet, so I'm glad to finally get on. But I'm not doing as good as you, though. I'm a Kentucky guy. I'm from Kentucky, so I love me some bourbon, and I don't have a bottle of Woodford sitting next to me, so I'm not doing as good as you, but I'm doing all right, though.
Yeah, well, I
Right?
did
Had
have.
I known that we were drinking the Woodford, I mean, I would have busted it out.
You know what? There's plenty of time to run off screen and run back on screen. Just whatever you want to do here. I mixed it with some Dr. Pepper. I didn't want to have it too straight. Then again, I'm taking a pint glass full of it. So what can I say? So anyhow, what does that mean for you all watching? Today's show might get a little bit more lively than normal, but that's okay. Then that's why you're watching Fantasy Football Weekly. Before we get into the topics for today's show, don't forget to head over to our YouTube channel and check out all of our shows from this past week, starting with Dynasty 365, where we had Mike Bauer from the Dynasty Rewind join the crew talking about rookie running backs. Drew, you were on that show as well.
Yep.
And then speaking of shows that Drew was on, you're just all over the place, man.
It's been a fun week.
Yeah, I'll say. You were on Fourth and Frames with Chris Battistel and Rhett Manuel. Tell us a little bit about that show while you're here.
Yeah, so we had Dave Kluge on to talk second-year breakouts and then some attainable dynasty stacks based on where ADP is right now. So we all went through and gave a second-year breakout that's a little bit higher up in the ADP and then a deeper second-year breakout, and went through the most recent dynasty startup ADP, found some fun stacks. Even though stacking is not required in dynasty, like it's not as big as it should be in best ball, it's still fun though. So we wanted to talk about some dynasty stacks that you can actually get right now in startup drafts. So it was a lot of fun. Kluge's always a great guest. Him and the rest of the guys over at Football Guys do so much good work. So it was a really fun show.
Absolutely. We got John McGlynn here on the X chat. Let's go. Speaking of John McGlynn, him and JT, Justin Taylor over on Tuesday, put out a fantastic top 3 or top 5 rookie prospects at each position heading into the NFL draft. If you haven't, again, head over to the Fantasy and Frames YouTube channel. Check it out. And while you're there, why don't you hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you're tuned in whenever the Fantasy and Frames family puts out fantasy football content. But let's get into it. Let's get into some of the topics for today's show. Let's talk about the aforementioned NFL draft. Let's go through the three of us. Let's talk about a couple players that we're thinking are sure things for fantasy. Some players that are like sleepers, some that we're fading, so on and so forth. Ladies first, Britt, please. Who do you have on your list that is a sure thing you think for fantasy football this season?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and I feel like this is a little chalky, but being that he's a tight end, maybe not. But I think that it's going to be Brock Bowers. I don't really care what team he goes to. He is that good. You don't play that well at that high of a level as a true freshman and then just continue to win multiple Mackey Awards, continue to put up that level of production with different quarterbacks, he's going to be great. Now, that said, I do think that he's going to go to the Jets, going to play with Aaron Rodgers. That obviously will help his stat line, no matter what Rodgers' personal opinions of life and this planet are. He's still pretty good at football. And then Sam Laporta put a kibosh on that whole rookie tight end narrative. That thing is not something that we bring up anymore. So we can throw that out the window. And with Bowers consistently placed in the top 10 of tight end rankings this season, I think that he's going to be amazing. And I'm going to have him wherever I can get him.
Speaking of Keith Fleming, one of our other co-hosts here on Fantasy Football Weekly, Britt, I knew I'd like to. Bowers is a unicorn. He just turned 21 in December. He's the perfect weapon in the modern NFL. There you go. And what I like about him is that he's great. I think he'll be great for redraft as well as for dynasty. Drew, who's your player?
Yeah, I love the Brock Bowers call. I had a list of 5 players that I consider sure things for me, and Brock Bowers is one of those guys. I'm going to take you talk about chalk. I'm going to take the guy that's 101 right now. I think he should be that way. I think he should be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, the number 1 pick in your rookie superflex drafts. And the first thing will just, if we just play off assumptions that he's going to go to Chicago, it's hard not to like the situation he's walking into. When healthy, the offensive line isn't terrible. It's certainly a lot better than what he got last year from USC. Them having Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift, who's a solid pass catcher back as well. The weapons for typically, whenever you're getting drafted number 1, the situation is not supposed to look this good. Like, the team is not supposed to be this nice to walk into. So you have to love the situation. And his sophomore season, he was a 92nd percentile passing EPA and expected points added. And despite the notion that he can't play in structure, he only scrambled less than 7% of the time, which was comparable to Sam Darnold in college and was a lower percentage than Joe Burrow. And so I know that a lot of his highlights are him on the move, making these crazy plays, the fun arm angles, things like that. And I think that's kind of caused his pocket presence to be underrated at this point, where if you watch the game film, he really is a strong passer in those 2-second dropbacks, 2.5 seconds. Like, he's on the money in a lot of these passes. And the offensive line I mentioned, I didn't love for USC last year. His pass catchers weren't all that great either, outside of the really young kid that they have out there at USC. But I think that, prospect fatigue is a very real thing. And whenever you spend more time talking about what the dude does with his nails and his phone case and his lips than you do what he actually does on the field, I just, you lose me. And not to say he doesn't have concerns, as far as sometimes whenever he scrambles, he is a little careless with the football, a little LaShawn McCoy-ish with how he carries the ball whenever he's running loose. And that's a very easily fixable thing. And the Chicago Bears aren't going to ask him to do as much as what USC was asking to do, trying to get him to play Superman. So I think we're going to see a more comfortable Caleb Williams immediately in his rookie year. And I think he's coming in his rookie season, I think he's a top 10 fantasy quarterback right off the rip.
Ooh.
And you know what I like about that is that, again, with all the weapons they have around him and the way they've just built up that team as a whole, both on offense and defense, like, you don't need him from an NFL perspective to do everything. So therefore you have the longevity with him going forward, which is great for redraft purposes and dynasty purposes. Somebody that, unlike the player I'm about to talk about, who I don't know whether or not longevity is in the cards, but for right now, give me the fantasy upside with the rushing floor with Jaden Daniels. Again, one of the premier college quarterbacks this past year at LSU, both in passing the ball for deep targets, as well as just the rushing ability, Heisman Award winner quarterback. The cheat code exists. The cheat code's not going away in fantasy football. Those rushing yards will add up. And unlike other teams that have surrounded their potential quarterbacks with, upgraded rosters like the Chicago Bears, the Commanders, it's been a patchwork. I think the patchwork mythology that they've had this offseason. I just made up a word there, but you get what I'm going with that there. I still think that the offensive line needs to be addressed, and hopefully it is addressed in the NFL draft. But if it's not, that's great. That's great for fantasy. Get Jaden Daniels out there on the run, as well as making passes deep down the field. You have the receiving targets there. Just great for fantasy redraft, I believe. For dynasty and the superflex or 2 quarterback leagues, definitely in a 1 quarterback dynasty. I may, in my rookie drafts in the first round, I may go more skill players and kind of like pass over him just because I don't know whether or not he has just the frame to last that long and to take those hits. I'm a little shell shocked still from 2012 with RG3 that I'm still having a hard time getting over that, So I am concerned a little bit about the potential concerns with Jaden Daniels, but for this year at least, I'm feeling pretty good as far as what we should be getting out of him. Okay, let's go in a little bit of different order than we had things. Let's go into a player that we're fading in this rookie class this year. This time, Drew, let's start with you.
Yeah, so for me, this one's probably not going to be a very popular pick because his ADP is pretty up there, and that's the main reason that I am fading him. It's Blake Corum, running back from Michigan. Right now, his DLF ADP is the running back 3, but I've got him down at running back 8. And running back 6 through 10 is a big tier for me right now, but there are several running backs in front of that I like him considerably more. He wasn't an early declare. His speed score is only in the 55th percentile. His college target share was only 7.7%, and his college yards per carry was only 4.7, despite playing behind one of the best offensive lines in college football basically every year. And I'm sure the injury he suffered the year prior had something to do with it, but he was 71st in PFF rushing grade, and he only averaged 2.42 yards after contact per attempt. But the thing is with Blake Corum is I feel like there's probably going to end up being an NFL team that likes the production that he put together. And if he ends up getting day 2 draft capital, I'm going to have to change my tune a bit. But pre-draft, I don't like him near as much as consensus.
What about you, Britt? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I completely agree on Blake Corum. And honestly, any of the running backs out of this class, I think that you could make a case for Jonathan Brooks or Wright, but I just don't see a lot of strength out of this running back class. They're all going to have day 2 draft capital at best. Several of them have previous knee injuries that are concerning. So it's just not worth it to me from a dynasty standpoint to take a chance on any of these guys. But to get more specific, rather than just I hate all running backs, I'm actually going to look at Xavier Worthy. And I know that he gained a ton of steam because he had that record-setting combine. He's gone up in some mock drafts, gone up in ADP some, but he's a project player. He's very small. He's only 5'11", 165. His strength is a big issue, making contested catches, fighting in press coverage specifically. And he honestly may have a hard time making it on a roster as more than a special teamer for a while. And then if you look at his college stats, he actually regressed from 2021 to 2023. His PFF grade in 2021 was a 79.2. He's had 981 yards. Last season, it was 68.9 with only 1,000 yards and only 5 touchdowns. I mean, when you don't see that improvement, despite all 3 years at Texas, that kind of gives you some pause as to whether or not his talent can translate to the NFL level.
So either Drew had an internet issue or he is completely just scoffing at the Xavier Worthy pick right there. We'll wait for him to get back before we start talking about that. But going back to Blake Corum, John says, even if he lands with his old coach now in Los Angeles, are we still fading Blake Corum? Is your opinion still in that, in that regard there?
So I'm a little on the fence as far as that goes. I need to see what the Chargers do with that offensive line, because last season they ranked dead last in run blocking, completely dead last. I know that it probably skewed the stats a little bit because Austin Eckler obviously wasn't himself. And then you had this slew of just rotating backups, but they're going to have to improve that offensive line if they're going to run that Greg Roman type system under Harbaugh. And I don't necessarily know that Corum is going to get, I don't know how efficient the Chargers as a whole, honestly, are going to be on offense. You took away all of Justin Herbert's weapons. You're basically building this team up from scratch. They could be in for a rough year. Now in Dynasty, who knows what next year and year 3 could bring, but I'm not sold on it.
Speaking of players, I'm not sold on, or we're not sold on. This guy, he's not exactly a first or second round player, but he's definitely somebody who's probably going to be available in your third or fourth rounds and so on, depending on how many rounds you have in your dynasty leagues rookie draft. But this name comes up more often than not for me, and that's Devontae Walker, wide receiver out of North Carolina. I get it. The offensive line was bad in North Carolina. It was just a bad situation all around for the Tar Heels, but he was supposed to be Drake May's number one go-to option. And when you look at what he did specifically in man coverage, and I like to focus on man coverage just because, and I'm not trying to downplay, let me preface this by saying I'm not trying to downplay just how difficult playing the wide receiver or a receiver position is, period, first and foremost. But I feel like versus man coverage, it's a little bit more of a challenge to get open, to make plays, than maybe it is finding a hole in zone coverage and sitting there, or just finding the right timing spot with your receiver. So when I'm looking at man coverage, according to PFF, he is the 8th worst rated wide receiver versus man. In terms of yards per route run, he fell outside the top 50 amongst draft eligible wide receivers this year. Here's the thing that really stood out versus man coverage. Allowed a quarterback passer rating of 25.9. I had never seen a passer rating that low when targeted by a wide receiver or any receiving target. That's crazy. And for somebody who's as big and athletically gifted as he is, to have, it's just mind-boggling. The contested catch rate wasn't there either. And here's the thing. Last year, I get it. I go back to the whole thing about North Carolina not being, a stacked team. At least, with the YOLO balls, or just, just the target, the targets that were coming his way, you figure he'd be more productive. And that's kind of concerning. If the guy is great in zone, but they're not great in man, like that's, you're becoming one dimensional in the receiving game. So I'm not too thrilled on him. I think you can get better value in your third and fourth rounds, like the player I'm going to talk about now. As far as the sleeper in this rookie class that I'm super high on, that's Malik Washington, wide receiver out of Virginia. PFF's second highest graded wide receiver in the 2024 draft class, right behind Malik Neighbors. And I'm not talking about in the Power 5 conferences. I mean across all the wide receivers in all of college football. Tied for 5th in yards per route run, had a 64.7% contested catch percentage on 17 targets. Among slot wide receivers, again, in all of college football, and even the schools where you can pad up stats where the competition isn't as great, wide receiver 8 in yards per route run. Versus man coverage, he ranks wide receiver 11 in yards per route run, 2nd in reception percentage, number 1 in missed tackle force versus man coverage, and has a whopping 85.7% contested catch rate on 7 targets versus man. I get it. He played at Virginia. That's going to be the knock. I don't care. Talent is talent. And for somebody in my third round, but I can get somebody who has had established production in college and possesses that upside. I'm willing to take the gamble on somebody like that versus somebody who should have done something great and just did not do that. So while we're waiting for Drew to get back here, let's go to the chat here. We got Jamie. What's up, Ori? What's up, Jamie? And of course, hi, Britt. Any thoughts on either of these players? Or I guess we could even talk draft strategy and dynasty also, as far as you get to the later rounds in your draft. Do you, at that point, and we're number crunchers, we like to go through the different analytics and whatnot, but at the third and fourth rounds, at what point do we, God forbid, throw away the numbers and just go off of production and performance from their college profiles?
Well, yeah, that's where you get those dart throws, because it thins out so quickly. After you go through your blue chips, then it's pretty much anybody's game. You're just hoping that these guys find some kind of role in their new offensive system. And for me, that's where I look at college production, both kind of on two sides of the same coin. I want to see what they produced on their own, and then I kind of want to look at it, how they produced with and without their star quarterbacks, because you've got guys like my sleeper, Jalen Polk, who didn't really produce until Michael Penix came in. So how much of that was his development versus how much of that was due to Penix being in there? So there's different ways to look at it. But once you get in the third and fourth rounds, take the guys who are athletic, who have the chance to kind of fall into a good situation, like Puka Nakua. I know that he's an anomaly, I don't think that there's ever going to be another Puka Nakua, so let's stop trying to make those comps. But that's where you find those gems and those diamonds in the rough.
As somebody who in a few dynasty leagues has a bunch of third and fourth round picks, I hope that there's another Puka Nakua. I'm
Right.
praying, I'm praying that there's another Puka Nakua. Just for information, Drew, the hotel internet went out where he's staying, so we have to wait just a
Oh.
little bit for him to come back. I know, right? Of all the timing, just horrible. So we'll get back to his college picks. Let's just dive into our bowl predictions for the 2024 season. Britt, let's start with you. Who is a
Oh, can I talk
fantasy?
about my sleeper?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Continue, please. Go with it.
Yeah. No, I spoiled it a little bit because I dropped his name, but I want
Right.
to talk a little bit about why I do like him and why I think that he did actually develop in the system and why it's not just due to Penix being his quarterback, because it's the improvement that we saw with his hands, like his deep routes, his yardage, his contested catches. I think that that development all bodes really well for him in the NFL. So he ranked 6th among the entire NCAA in deep catches, 9th in deep yards, and 15th in contested catches.
Mm.
And he's not just a field stretch guy, which you would think by looking at these stats that he is. But no, he does have a pretty versatile route tree to shake things up depending on which role that they want him to play. I don't think that he's going to be a guy who's going to break out right away because there are these, the wide receiver class is super stacked this year. But by the end of the season, I think that you'll start to see some big things from him. And especially in Dynasty, I think that he's a guy who by year 2 or 3 should be on target for a big breakout.
Yeah, that is. I love seeing the contested. There are a couple stats that just really get me going. I love in the contested catch rate. I love in all the production you were just saying there. But again, it comes down to one of those things. Like, do you trust, like you were saying, the quarterback situation or the talent? And speaking more onto what you were saying, I think I agree with you. I think I'd just rather go for the talented player with the metrics and the upside there and the skill set. We got Keith in the chat, of course. Shocking. Britt bringing the stacks, speaking my language. Love it. Yes, we love you too, Keith. All right, let's get into some 2024 bowl predictions again. Once Drew comes back, we'll go back to his college players who are his sleepers and fades. Britt, let me ask you, who is your fantasy breakout player for next season?
So this doesn't feel like I'm going out on too big of a limb here, but when I looked at last year's stats and his current ADP, it kind of does. So I'm just going to do it. I'm going to say that it's Zamir White. We saw what he was able to do in the absence of Josh Jacobs last season, and everybody's a little, gun shy to draft him because they did bring in Alexander Madison. But I think that actually is better for him because Madison's going to be that guy. He's always been a backup. And we saw last season when he was the starter, what happened? He eventually lost the role to Ty Chandler because he is not a starting running back caliber player. That role is going to go to Zamir White. Now, I know that there's some uncertainty about the quarterback situation, but even if it is Aiden O'Connell, I'm honestly not too worried about it. Aiden O'Connell was the quarterback last season towards the end when Zamir White had a little baby bit of a breakout. He finished as RB 56 last season. I think that he's very much a high-end RB2, if not more this year.
Jamie in the chat chiming in, ha ha ha, more like Alexander Madison. Ha ha ha. Exactly. I should have had that drop ready to go. My bad. All right, let me get into my breakout player for next season. Keith Fleming, who's not with us this week, he had me on his DFS show. I want to say back in week 8, whatever week it was when the Chargers were facing the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay. And I was looking up, sleepers for DFS purposes, low salary players, and I came across a player for the Green Bay Packers in Dontavion Wicks, who during the stretch of time where Christian Watson was out, was the first read in all passing targets for the Green Bay Packers amongst wide receivers, had the most efficiency in yards per route run and yards after the catch per reception. I thought to myself, holy crap, why aren't we talking about Dontavion Wicks, And it turned out, fortunately, knock on wood, that was a great pick that week. He got the 13 points that most people wanted out of a low-salary player. So you're feeling pretty happy. And then we saw what he did for the rest of the season last year. He led all the Green Bay wide receivers in yards after the catch per reception. No other receiver on the team came close to touching that metric that he attained. He was tied with Jaden Reed in missed tackles forced with 10. Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs were the next two on the list as far as receiving options with just 2 missed tackles forced, which is second on the team in quarterback rating when targeted, first on the team in percentage of passes thrown for over 20 yards or more, first on the team in yards per route run. He outperformed his expected fantasy points per game on average last season. Again, going back to man versus zone coverage, second on the team in fantasy points versus man coverage, tied for number one on the team with Jaden Reed in yards per route run. Here's the thing, and he's an outside wide receiver. He doesn't play a lot of slot. That's where Jaden Reed's role. But here's what it comes down to. Christian Watson, right? We all know opportunity and volume is king in fantasy football. However, at what point do we start fading the potential for opportunity that Christian Watson should get with the efficiency that Dontavion Wicks does bring? Do we trust Christian Watson to play a full season? And I hate doing it, and I hate bringing up these hypotheticals when it comes to players' health because you never know. But the fact that we're already hearing that he's going to see a specialist for his hamstring injuries, that's not exactly like a ringing endorsement for me for Christian Watson going next year. And the fact that Wicks was playing up to par and then some with his opportunities, I don't know, Britt. Am I crazy for thinking that maybe Dontavion Wicks just outperforms flat out Christian Watson, or is there some concern that Watson may just get rid of all of Dontavion Wicks' upside?
No, I was down on Christian Watson last season, and this was before the hamstring injury occurred. I don't think that he's anything more than like a speedy field stretcher. Um, I they showed what they could do with these other guys, with Doubs, with Reed, with Wicks. And what makes Wicks even more appealing is the fact that Reed had so many touchdowns last season. So much of his fantasy value was based on touchdowns. How much does he regress, and how many of those touchdowns now go to Wicks if he gets solidly into that rotation? I think people are still going to be high on Christian Watson, giving him a big chance because on paper, he should be the wide receiver 1. In reality, that's not the fact. Dontavion Wicks is going to surpass him, and you're going to get him at a much, much lower ADP than you are for Watson. So, yeah, I'm all aboard the Wicks train here.
Jamie has a comment that we will not put up on screen, but I'll just say that's pretty funny. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, head over to our YouTube channel, look at the live chat. You'll understand what I'm talking about. Okay. So we covered the players that we're looking forward to in terms of breakout this coming season. Let's talk about a couple players that we're not so high on and that we're kind of, well, let me put it another way. Others are high on, but we're kind of fading and not buying into the hype, not drinking the Kool-Aid, insert other expression that talks about what we're going to be talking about. Britt, let's start with you again. Who's a player that you are fading this year?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go Marquise Brown, unfortunately. Has this man ever played a full season? Honestly, I legitimately want to know. Even in Pee Wee, has he ever played a full season? Because I don't feel like that's the case right now. Now, I do get the appeal that people are looking at now that he's with the Chiefs and playing with Patrick Mahomes, and especially now that Rashee Rice is in some legal trouble with charges officially being filed. But I think it's going to be the same thing that it always is with Marquise Brown. He's going to put up a few solid weeks, then something's going to happen. He's going to disappoint you and be unusable for the rest of the season. I am not one to label players injury prone. It's very, very difficult for me to do that. But with Marquise Brown, trading himself away in fantasy football last year was a big enough red flag for me that he himself thinks that he's injury prone, and I'm just not going to have him on my rosters.
Yeah, when I heard that, I was like, damn, I don't even know where to begin with the whole metaphysical discussion of what you actually think of yourself from any perspective, let alone a fantasy perspective. No, that's really cool. I agree with it. Just the dependability isn't there. The best ability is availability. And even with Rashee Rice, dealing with his legal troubles, we don't know what that fallout's going to be. I feel like every year we kind of know what the formula is. It's Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce. Now they have, Isaiah Pacheco. as a reliable person out of the backfield, which they haven't had since Spencer Ware and Damian Williams, which that tells you just how long it's been. And that defense, the defense, they did lose L'Jarius Sneed in a trade with the Tennessee Titans, but still, I still think that defense is top notch. And so I think Hollywood Brown, even if Rashee Rice was there, was kind of like, and I've been using this analogy a lot, but he was like the cherry on top of the sundae that they didn't need, but it's good to have. Like, you still have the whipped cream and the hot fudge and the ice cream below that. Unless you're lactose intolerant, which you're having none of that. So anyhow, enough about that. Let's get into my player. So Fantasy Pros, and this is my criteria for determining who's like being hyped up versus not hyped up. And people can make the argument that there are other ways to go about it. This is the way I'm going to go about it. He is the Fantasy Pros PPR ECR running back 24. I'm talking about Javonte Williams. Check this out. Last year, third amongst running backs on the team in success rate versus gap schemes. He was running back 2 in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was the running back 3 in yards before contact per attempt. He underperformed in fantasy points versus expected fantasy points per game. So number 3, number 2, number 3, you know what that doesn't really tell me? He's not number 1 in any of these categories. And I really wish Drew was here because he has spoken very highly of the player that I'm going to be referencing here, as well as Derek Brown last week on Fourth and Frames. And that is the person who was actually more efficient in that backfield was Jaleel McLaughlin. One of the more elusive running backs in all of the NFL. But he just didn't get the opportunity. Javonte Williams did. He's not getting, with the yards before contact RB3. So what is that telling me? That's telling me, wow, he's not even making do of the opportunity he has before a linebacker or a safety or a defensive back comes close to getting him on the ground. And the fact that he's not really too elusive either, that's a cause for concern. And yes, I get it. Last year he was coming off of the ACL injury, and people in the medical field tend to say, well, it's actually 2 years it takes for players to come back after an injury like that. I don't know what to make of that. I'm not a medical person. I couldn't begin to tell you X, Y, and Z about it. What I can tell you, though, is that performance is performance. And if you're a head coach who just got, dragged through the mud, and rightfully so with how they handled the whole Russell Wilson situation, and the fact that, they traded so much to get him from New Orleans, you want to win now. Like now's your time to win. Now you have to really win. You're potentially getting your future quarterback in this draft. A lot of people are pairing Bo Nix with Sean Payton just because of schematic schemes and styles that they both, one coached and the other one played in. But at a certain time, the efficiency and the performance just has to take over here. And I feel like if Jaleel McLaughlin, assuming that they don't address the running back position in the NFL draft, I feel like Jaleel McLaughlin is in a position to kind of take over this backfield, especially during training camp and the start of the season. Do you have any thoughts or opinions about Jaleel McLaughlin or just Javonte Williams in general?
Yeah, I think that entire backfield, have we ever known Sean Payton to run with just one guy? That's
Sure.
my biggest issue with the system, not even the athlete or the production. It's the system that Javonte finds himself in. Sean Payton is notorious for rotating that backfield, putting in the hot hand, using people in the quote, hey guys, cover your ears if you're tired of hearing this, the Joker role that he loves to use. And he has no player loyalty at all. So he's going to roll with the hot hand. Jaleel McLaughlin was obviously that guy for a large part of last season. And then, they have to figure out their quarterback situation, their receiver situation. They've got Cortland Sutton, but that's pretty much it. How, going back to, what I said earlier about the Chargers, how efficient is this offense even going to be, let alone when you're splitting carries and you're not efficient with those carries?
No, exactly. And it makes you wonder, at a certain point, do you abandon what you're used to from a coaching perspective and just I know this sounds cliche, but just put the best players on the field as much as you can and hope that you can do something with it there.
Yeah, the fact that he refused to put Marvin Mims on the field, and Mims was averaging, 18 something yards per catch and, just insane numbers, and they still would not get him on the field.
Right.
It tells me all I need to know.
Got a comment here from Jamie, an acceptable comment. Thank you, Jamie. Do you think Dulcich could be a Joker role player if he can stay healthy? Britt, what are your thoughts?
I always have, and I was super high on Dulcich coming in uh, to the NFL. He just has not been able to actually get on the field. But when you look at what he did in college, his catch rate, he's a great blocker. He's really a good all-around tight end, and his ability to gain yards after the catch and just evade tackles is very, very impressive. Now, again, it comes down to that big old asterisk in that comment if he can stay healthy, which we don't yet know. But this is only his third season. I'm not willing to put that injury prone tag on him yet, but it's in the back of my mind.
I hear you. I hear you. So, truth be told, when we were putting together the show sheet, Keith Fleming behind the scenes, who is stuck in traffic, we wish you a safe drive to where you're going. Put in a question here is, which player on a new team this season will have the best fantasy season? And I feel like that was just a little bit too limiting, because for me, and maybe we could have this discussion later, there's only one player who's locked stock to be having the best fantasy season this year, and that is Saquon Barkley, just going to the Philadelphia Eagles. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be a little bit too obvious. I wanted to expand my stretch. So we're gonna make this question: who's gonna have an excellent fantasy season? Who's a player on a new team? Britt, why don't you kick us off here? Who do you think?
Yeah, I'm glad that you switched it, because I did put Saquon Barkley, because I was like, who else can there be? It's the best line he's ever played behind in his entire career.
Yeah.
And the man still absolutely crushed it behind that piss poor Giants offensive line. So I'm glad that we changed the question. I'm actually interested in Austin Eckler in Washington this season.
Okay.
He's reuniting with his former offensive coordinator, who was back in LA, if y'all don't remember, when there was that thunder and lightning duo of Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler. Eckler's never been a real running back, in my opinion. He's a very excellent pass catching back with certain rushing abilities, but his true upside and talent lies in that receiving work. Now that he's paired with his old offensive coordinator, he's going to a team that already has Brian Robinson, who proved last season that he could be that lead running back role. I think that Austin Eckler has some really interesting upside, especially in PPR formats. And after what he did last year, I think that his ADP is going to fall a little bit. So I would not be surprised if Austin Eckler jumps back up as a top 5 running back.
No, that's a really good call. And as a Commanders fan, I hope you're right.
As a Dallas fan, I hope I'm wrong.
Just going back, speaking about the coach, are we talking about Anthony Lynn, right? That was everywhere he goes, he turns these running backs into gold, whether it was back in Buffalo with LaShawn McCoy, then he goes to San Diego / Los Angeles with Melvin Gordon, who super inefficient Melvin Gordon was still one of the top fantasy running backs. And so you add Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson Jr., who is a more efficient running back than Melvin Gordon was, at least I believe, as well as the numbers say. So yeah, I hope you're right there. Okay, so obviously I won't say Austin Eckler. Definitely not saying Saquon Barkley. Here's one that some might call spicy, but I believe in it. That is the PPR ECR running back 36 over on Fantasy Pros. Talking about Zach Moss. Yeah, Zach Moss going to the Cincinnati Bengals, and let's just compare, him to Joe Mixon's performance last season. Zach Moss had a higher yards after contact per attempt metric, a higher breakaway run percentage, a higher PFF elusive rating, a comparable success rate to both man and zone schemes. When I say man, I mean man/gap running schemes versus zone running schemes. He matched his expected fantasy points per game average on the season compared to Mixon, who kind of underperformed. Now let's compare these two running backs just a little bit further. Both the Texans and the Bengals, in terms of the run blocking, that goes on with their offensive line, not awesome. Like they're both like within the top 13 of the worst run blocking offensive lines in all of the NFL. But you look at what the acquisitions have been for both teams this offseason. for the Houston Texans, fairly loaded on the defensive side of the ball. If you go to NFL.com and you look at, the acquisitions page, it's like cornerback, defensive lineman, cornerback, safety. Versus the Cincinnati Bengals, who they had drafted a couple positions along the offensive line. They brought in a bunch of run blocking tight ends. So again, it's not, these are not sexy names or sexy acquisitions or moves, but they do lend themselves to the fact that they're trying to improve this run blocking unit from a year ago. Now, what's the elephant in the room is that, Zach Moss didn't have a lot of receiving work last year in Indianapolis versus Joe Mixon, who had a ton of receiving work last year. But when you're looking at their yards per reception, I think Mixon was like 7.2 and Zach Moss was 7.1, or it was very close. So going to this offense that still has T. Higgins, which we'll see if that is the case after the NFL draft, right? Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. I don't know. I could see Mixon Zach Moss stepping in there and having that success in that scheme. All right. Now I want to ask you, Britt, the second the words Zach Moss came out of my lips and came into your ear, immediate reaction, and please be honest.
No, I think that's a great call because you mentioned that the offensive line was pretty, subpar, to put it nicely, last season. But if you look at the odds for the NFL draft, depending on which book you look at, the Bengals are like minus 200 to draft an offensive lineman with their first pick. And there are some really, really good offensive linemen in this year's draft class. So whether or not they trade up to get one, whether they just let it come to them at 18, which is still a pretty good spot, there still should be some very good ones available. I think that it's going to be a much better situation overall for the running game in Cincinnati. And then we saw what Moss did in Indianapolis last season. Granted, that line was a lot better. Chase Brown should still play in the mix, but I think that he is a rotational piece. I don't think that he's just going to take a ton of touches away from Moss. So I really like this call.
Yeah, and of course his ADP is going to be farther down in lists where I think he could be a potential value for players going for it. Okay, good to hear that I'm not going crazy and just picking people willy-nilly out of the blue. Not speaking of picking players willy-nilly out of the blue, who's a player who had a down year for you, or just down year in 2023, that you, Britt, are not giving up on and you're going to show faith in this year in drafts?
I'm so embarrassed to say this, and it's going to make me cringe coming out of my mouth. But I'm not giving up on Kyle Pitts yet, okay? Call me a sucker. Whatever you want to. But with a coaching change, a quarterback change, no other competition now that Jonnu Smith is gone. And side note, who would have ever thought that Jonnu Smith should have or would have been competition for Kyle Pitts? That's here nor there. I cannot quit Kyle Pitts this year. It might bite me again. In fact, I know that it will in some aspect. But right now, at this current stage of the drafting pre-season, off-season process, that's where I'm at. And I am not giving up on Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to stick with my Homer roots here and go for this person right here. Oh, I got that right. Yay. Going with Terry McLaurin, the PPR ECR wide receiver 32. Last I heard, and I could be wrong here, but having turf toe is a pain in the ass and not really great for any skill player. He got this injury, I want to say, in the second preseason game in August, and things just didn't look the same for Scary Terry as they had in previous seasons. It also doesn't help when your offensive coordinator doesn't scheme the offense to get the ball to the best receiving option on the team as consistently as he should have been. But again, new coaching changes, new offensive coordinator, new style of offensive play calling, a new quarterback. Like, this is the year, right? Like, I'm that person where I've got to the point where Terry McLaurin, who I will not give up because I think he's an excellent football player, has the potential to be a great or an excellent fantasy football wide receiver, just needs that last piece to get over the hump here, which, by the way, this is kind of a dig at Washington Commanders fans, as I am one. Therefore, I feel like I can get away with saying this. And that is, there's a lot of us out there that since 2012 have been like, okay, actually, let me go back. Since the last Super Bowl, so 91, 92, we're just a piece away. Well, we've been a piece away for a very long time. But in terms of Terry McLaurin's fantasy value and salvaging said fantasy value, I think we are literally a quarterback away from helping to reestablish him as somebody who can have elite upside, or at least at the very least, excellent, wide receiver 2, borderline wide receiver 3 upside, and that's being conservative with that take there. Now, you being a Cowboys fan, I'm just scared to death to ask you what your thoughts are on Terry McLaurin this season and going
No,
forward.
I think that what you said was right. Y'all are just pretty much a quarterback away, especially with Dan Quinn bringing everybody and their mothers over from Dallas in free agency to really shore up the defense. That was another big thing that Washington lacked last season, but now they've, improved upon that. Jaden Daniels, who is projected to go to Washington, trades and just other weirdness notwithstanding, is so good at deep ball accuracy. And that's where Terry McLaurin thrives, is on the deep ball. And it's not only when he's in the pocket, he's great at making those pressured throws as well. As long as he can stay healthy and he is durable enough to hold up, because I know that that's the biggest concern about his play, is just how, slender he is frame wise. But yeah, with Daniels there, as long as he's healthy, they're going to scheme up some deep plays for McLaurin. And I'm not excited about it.
Well, you can be excited about it with the exception of 2 games out of the year. How about that?
Right. Okay, fair.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, let's get into one of our last questions here. And again, it's April 11th, so we got some time. We got some time to change our minds here. But if you had to give an early Super Bowl prediction, yes, we're going there, folks, an early Super Bowl prediction for this coming year, what would it be?
So I'm just going to go trendy AF, and I'm going to say Lions and Texans. The current odds on both of these teams actually aren't that bad. The Lions are at plus 1,200 and the Texans are at plus 1,400. So I'm not going super out of the box here, but considering that the 49ers and Chiefs are both at 600 and 650, I feel like I'm getting pretty good odds there. And they were really close last season to both being there. I think that the improvements that the Texans made on both sides of the ball, all across the board, are enough that they can get there. So yeah, I'm gonna go Lions Texans.
Nice. We got Mr. Scampers in the chat. Evening, Jorge and Britt. Evening to you, Mr. Scampers. Are you attending the Fantasy Football Expo? If not, you should be. And that goes for everybody watching. That was a little side note. Do they pay me to say that? What can I say? No, they don't pay me to say that. I just like talking about the Fantasy Football Expo. Anywho, I'm going to go with a rematch of good old Super Bowl I, talking about the Green Bay Packers versus the Kansas City Chiefs, because in my opinion, to beat as Ric Flair said back in the pro wrestling days of the 80s and 90s, to be the man, you got to beat the man. Well, beat Patrick Mahomes, beat Travis Kelce, beat this defense, beat Andy Reid. Then I'll start believing in it. Look who the Chiefs went through. They went through the Bills. They went through the Ravens. They went through the 49ers. I mean, we hadn't seen a team cruise through such, and I do mean cruise through such competition, elite competition, since Tom Brady did it when he won the Super Bowl with the Bucs, going through, Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl and Aaron Rodgers in the NFC Championship. So, and then Drew Brees, also in the playoffs. So, definitely the Chiefs. And then as far as the Green Bay Packers are concerned, they were this close to upsetting the 49ers on that Sunday night or Saturday night football game this past year. And I believe just another year with Jordan Love maturing, I think we're going to see something special in Green Bay going forward for years to come. So that's where I'm going with that. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of the show. Britt, anything you want to plug, anything you want to talk about inside or outside the world of fantasy football? And it could be everything from content to your favorite beer to whatever the hell you want to talk about.
Yeah, I know that I talked about Arkansas athletics last week, but with the shakeup in the basketball world, hiring John Calipari as our basketball coach, I do not know how I feel about it. Apparently, everybody switched sides on their feelings after the press conference. They loved it. I did not see it. I was working. But if you haven't seen a clip of it, go watch this one clip in particular where he says, I went and talked to the team. There is no team. Everybody transferred out / decommitted. So I'm going to be very interested in seeing what Coach Calipari can do as far as recruiting and bringing in transfers so that we actually have enough players to field a basketball team by the time basketball season rolls around.
It's funny. If Drew didn't lose his internet at his hotel, he would have been the perfect counterpoint for this conversation because he is a Kentucky fan. Yeah. So it would have been nice to hear his point of view there. Yeah, I want to give a shout out to my wife who is going to she got us tickets to go to this place outside of DC called the State Theater, where there's going to be a Green Day cover band and then a Warped Tour cover band. Definitely have not been out to a concert in forever, so let alone 2 concerts. So that should be fun this weekend. For sports, I live in the nation's capital, so there's not a lot of positive things to talk about, except for Alexander Ovechkin, hockey player, Capitals, Washington Capitals. I want to say it's his 18th season with at least 30 goals. I hear that's important in the world of NHL hockey, so kudos to you, Alexander Ovechkin. Any weekend plans for you?
I will be working, so I'm all work and no play girl right now, which is why I'm drinking a beer on the podcast. I'm like, well, I guess, no, just kidding. But yes, I will just be working. Still working on that mock draft because it's sneaking up on me very, very quickly. But at least it will be nice weather, so I'll get to be outside and hopefully deal with some people on the patio while I'm working.
There you go. There you go. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for tuning into this week's episode of Fantasy Football Weekly. Again, you can catch us every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. I want to thank Drew for making his appearance. Sorry that the internet cut out at your hotel, but we'll get you on the show next time. So for everybody in the chat, thank you very much. For Britt, for myself, you all have a good week and good weekend, and we'll see you next week.